Hey everyone, welcome back to their Hardware News Recap of the Week. In this one, we have an update on the black market GPUs story. Related to that, in the news this week, the U.S. Department of Justice has arrested a couple of AI GPU smugglers who are exporting GPUs, according to the U.S., illegally to go into China. AMD has been hit by U.S. GPU export controls as well. Its bottom line has been affected. And then Trump says that Intel's CEO should resign, the new one, Lip-Bu Tan, who's been in the news a lot lately. And we actually just talked about his decisions in our Intel collapse video. And then finally, there's some other stories too, but one of the big ones here is that Windows has Crocs. No, wait, that's not the big one. That's the that is a story. It's actually real. But also, AMD is working on a dual CCD, dual X3D solution, allegedly. That and more in the news this week. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Lian Li LANCool 217. We recently reviewed the LANCool 217 on the channel and found that its thermal performance is overall competitive with other top cases. The LANCool 217 combines a set of larger 170mm front-mounted fans with more standard-sized internal case fans for high airflow. The front of the case offers the ability to rearrange the fans to offset them towards either the CPU or the GPU, with wood accents along the case to give it a unique look. Learn more about the Lian Li LANCool 217 at the link in the description below. All right, so first of all, holy shit. The support for the last week has been absolutely insane. So thank you to everybody in our audience for making our upcoming AI black market GPU movie a reality. You've possibly seen that we have a movie launching on YouTube on August 15th. It's covering the GPU black market that has developed in China as a result of US export controls. In case you missed our announcement video, we traveled thousands of miles around China to half a dozen cities to meet with experts in video cards, ranging from manufacturing experts to suppliers of banned GPUs and their users. The video is our most expensive to produce yet, and that story has continued to develop even as we work on editing the movie. Just some behind the scenes here. It is currently Sunday as I film this. We are posting that on Friday. That's the plan. And I am currently trying to make a decision of if I make a day trip flight somewhere. I can't say where, because we found another potentially very important source for the story, and we could get them in the video. But it'd be like, I'm not sure if it's even physically possible to get there and back in one day, because I still have to finish editing large sections of the video. One of the challenges is that it's multilingual, and for parts of that, I'm the only one who can edit it. So anyway, we're trying to figure that out. We are really excited for the launch. I'm about to personally switch solely to focusing on pushing that through. Vitaly will be working with me very closely to finish it on the editing side, and we'll post late on the day, Friday the 15th. As part of this, we made our own Kickstarter-style fundraiser on our store, and again, holy shit, you all really came out in force to support us. Thank you. It's been overwhelming to see the progress bar advance as we've blown through the initial goals, then the stretch goals, and now we've added super stretch goals. That's right. I decided to take NVIDIA's branding and I put the word super on it. This funding support is additionally funding our next videos, and as we're filming this, some of these goals are pretty exciting. One of them was to drive to the US State Department and Commerce Department to follow up on our unanswered emails. But now that we've surpassed even the super stretch goal for that, we're modifying that plan to be even better. So instead of just driving out there and probably getting turned away immediately, which is what we expect and we said on the page, we are now expanding the scope of that content. Instead, we're beginning the process of contacting lawmakers, congresspeople, senators, basically government officials, people who make decisions, to try and get someone on camera, at least one person, to talk about this sort of world of high-tech component smuggling and export controls and restrictions on things like GPUs and CPUs, and just get someone to talk about it. We have one decent maybe lead for a possible interview. I'm not sure yet. This is the very beginning of this process. We don't know when that would air because it's going to depend on whoever agrees. It's going to depend on their schedule. We have one maybe lead, and we're going to dig into more, see if we can get some people. We are taking this extremely seriously and putting the funding towards good use, so thank you. And also, it'll advance our coverage of technology as there's sort of this increasing intersection of high-tech components, which happen to land in our area of expertise, and the geopolitical mess that exists in the world. And we're just trying to get to the bottom of the story as they relate to each other. Another stretch goal we added is to distribute a copy of the high-quality render of the movie file itself on USB drives. That would be for anyone who buys a backer tier. Maybe after the fact we'd sell it or something on the store if we could figure out kind of a good pipeline to do that. This will allow you to watch it without any AdSense ads that YouTube runs offline at any time you want and add it to your media collection. Usual copyright laws obviously apply, so please don't re-upload our movie. However, if our movie ever gets taken down by another entity from YouTube and it just vanishes, you are welcome to upload it somewhere to preserve it. Just please respect that. We don't want that done if ours is still online, because we do want to get people onto one upload to see it. I'm not sure if we'll hit that particular stretch goal. It'd be pretty cool, but if we do, we'll probably make a separate video as well where we're gonna burn these files onto USB keys ourselves. I don't know if you still use burn that way. Like, look, I come from the CD and DVD era, okay? But we'll put them on the devices ourselves, and that means we need to build a high I/O throughput computer with a really good USB controller and some kind of crazy USB hub, and just swap drives. I'll probably have to write a script or work with Wendell from Level 1 Techs maybe to write something custom in Linux. We'll figure it out. We'll do something cool for that video if we hit that stretch goal as well, in addition to the actual distribution of the copy of the file. But anyway, I'll have to raid Micro Center for some of the USB keys. As for what's next, we can use some feedback. So the new challenge is, how much setup do we do in the movie? Basically, we're not sure how much to explain the part of what are the demand drivers. Why is there so much demand for these GPUs? Why are they banned? What's the government's reasoning, stated reasoning, for banning them for sale into China? Stuff like that. And the reason I mention this is because I'm always worried about YouTube and how it behaves, where if we really want to do the story justice, we need more setup explaining how all of it works and why people care about this, why they're willing to risk potentially jail, as we've just seen in the news, to smuggle GPUs. And we would need to spend a good amount of time explaining and doing setup, which means we would be delaying the sort of exciting parts of the story of going around China with all these different interesting people and characters and learning about the process. We'd be delaying that further into the movie to get the foundational setup in. And from a storytelling and an informational perspective, it is better to put that information in there. From a YouTube perspective, I don't know that it is. And that kind of worries me because YouTube will be like, oh, this is the boring part, so it's penalized or whatever. So I don't know. Let us know what you think if you want to see that information. But basically, the extra time up front will allow us to better establish why any of this is even happening to begin with. And we've also seen a lot of people on Reddit who have absolutely no idea how any of the laws work, but sure think they do relating to this stuff. And that is probably worth talking about to just get better information out there so that people have access to it. But anyway, we're working on the next big investigations already, but we're going to finish this one first. And let's get on to the first big story, which is related. It is the US arresting AI chip smugglers who are in America. All right, so the US government has charged 2 people in California for violating the Export Control Reform Act by smuggling chips into China, the US DOJ alleges. In a news release, the Department of Justice said the 2 individuals, quote, have been arrested on a federal criminal complaint alleging they knowingly exported to China tens of millions of dollars worth of sensitive microchips used in artificial intelligence AI applications, end quote. The government said the 2 individuals exported the so-called sensitive technology to China through their company ALX Solutions Incorporated without, quote, obtaining the required license or authorization from the US Department of Commerce, end quote. This is because technically a license can be obtained for specific exports. However, even NVIDIA has struggled to obtain these, and so has AMD. Officials did not specify which chips had been illegally shipped to China. However, the Register reported the shipments allegedly contained the NVIDIA H100 processor and RTX 4090 GPU, based on an affidavit seen by the outlet. The H100 and RTX 4090 are both subject to US export control laws. The government's news release describes the operation by saying, quote, a review of export records, business records, and company websites indicates that a December 2024 shipment and at least 20 previous shipments by ALX Solutions involved exports from the US to shipping and freight forwarding companies in Singapore and Malaysia, which commonly are used as transshipment points to conceal illegal shipments to China, end quote. Now, we'll have a lot to say about this on August 15th because actually a lot of the groups we worked with and people we worked with in China were telling us how they work through Sanguo, or third countries, basically external entities to the US-China chain to get a third country in there to bring products in. We actually found some companies in some of these third countries, as they call them, who enable that. The US regulators have scrutinized AI GPU shipments to Southeast Asia as a potential route for smuggling restricted chips to China. Earlier this year, authorities arrested 3 people in Singapore for fraud involving servers, and the US has reportedly considered adding AI chip restrictions to Malaysia and Thailand. For NVIDIA's part, NVIDIA has distanced itself from reports of smuggling GPUs, while Jensen Huang has positioned himself closer to US President Donald Trump. In May, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang told Bloomberg that there was, quote, no evidence of AI chip diversion, end quote. Last month, the company said that trying to, quote, cobble together data centers from smuggled products is a losing proposition, end quote. Now, NVIDIA describes smuggling AI GPUs as a so-called non-starter. TechCrunch posted a statement from NVIDIA about the arrests. Quote, this case demonstrates that smuggling is a non-starter. We primarily sell our products to well-known partners, including OEMs, who help us ensure that all sales comply with U.S. export control rules. Even relatively small exporters and shipments are subject to thorough review and scrutiny, they say, and any diverted products would have no service, support, or updates, end quote. Now, the evidence begs to differ from NVIDIA's statement because we now know firsthand that actually these GPUs are getting into China, and it is definitely not a non-starter, as they call it, from a business proposition standpoint. Before these 2 arrests were made public, an investigation by the Financial Times uncovered that more than $1 billion of banned NVIDIA GPUs have been smuggled into China. And Bloomberg reported that China is trying to build data centers in the desert with NVIDIA's AI chips. Additionally, Reuters said that demand for AI GPU repair services is booming in China. Quote, demand in China has begun surging for a business that, in theory, shouldn't exist. The repair of advanced NVIDIA artificial intelligence chipsets that the US has banned the export of to its trade and tech rival, end quote. This dystopian type future that we're staring down the barrel of for high-tech smuggling, it's just really bizarre from sort of the enthusiast standpoint where you're like, I just like building computers that play video games. And some of those GPUs are now incredibly valuable to people, and it's so uniquely interesting, I think, for those of us who are in this for an entirely different reason. But anyway, if this intrigues you, know that there's a lot more to the story. Again, we spent 3 weeks in Asia. We're bouncing around all over the place to try and uncover more information, the inner workings of how the black market operates, and we will have our own investigation into it up on August 15th. And again, to support our work, you can grab one of the backer tiers linked below. Now, NVIDIA isn't alone. It is the most impacted, though, and I'll say for Intel's part, we asked several people, this is just like, I don't know. I guess I'll give you a preview of this just verbally, but we asked several people about, well, what about Intel GPUs? And they basically all laughed at us. So it felt kind of sad for Intel. I was like, oh, you guys are bullying them. Intel's not worth breaking laws for in America. Anyway, NVIDIA isn't alone. It's the most impacted. AMD, however, is also part of this. So AMD is feeling an $800 million financial squeeze thanks to Uncle Sam's AI chip restrictions. During AMD's second quarter earnings, the company said this, quote, our second quarter results were impacted by the US government's export control on our AMD Instinct MI308 data center GPU products. For the quarter, these restrictions led to approximately $800 million in inventory and related charges, end quote. AMD's news isn't unexpected. In April, AMD filed an 8K form with the SEC warning about an $800 million charge related to the US government's tightened export controls. That warning has now turned into reality. During a call with analysts, CNBC quoted AMD CEO Lisa Su as saying, quote, AI business revenue declined year over year as US export restrictions effectively eliminated MI308 sales to China, and we began transitioning to our next generation, end quote. Now, AMD created the MI308 chip for China. However, the US government banned sales of the chip to China earlier this year before reversing that decision later. Now, the US says that it'll review licenses for selling the MI308 to China. However, AMD's current outlook does not include MI308 revenue from China, and AMD said its, quote, license applications are currently under review by the US government, end quote. The $800 million charge didn't stop AMD from bringing in billions, though. AMD announced revenue of $7.7 billion for the quarter. AMD's data center segment total revenue was $3.2 billion, up significantly year over year. AMD said that its data center segment growth was driven by, quote, strong demand for AMD EPYC processors, end quote, that offset, quote, headwinds impacting AMD Instinct MI308 shipments to China, end quote. AMD's client and gaming segment reached $3.6 billion in revenue, up 69% year over year. The company attributed the growth due to demand for Zen 5 desktop processors, Radeon GPUs, and semi-custom solutions. So that's what they attribute it to, their desktop processors. we attribute it to Intel sucking, but it's kind of like all the same vein at this point. They're all just mixed into the same bucket. Up next, according to CNBC, US President Donald Trump said, quote, he will impose a 100% tariff on imports of semiconductors and chips, but not for companies that are, quote, building in the United States, end quote. That's right. The guy who last week said he didn't know what NVIDIA was.
I said, who the hell is he? What's his name? His name is Jensen Huang, NVIDIA. I said, what the hell is NVIDIA? I've never heard of it before. He said, you don't want to know about it, sir.
Is now suggesting 100% tariffs unless something is made in the US, but there's some vagueness in that quote. Via Bloomberg, the president said the following.
The good news for companies like Apple is if you're building in the United States or have committed to build, without question committed to build in the United States, there will be no charge. So in other words, we'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge.
This was accompanied by Tim Cook, aka Tim Apple, CEO of Apple, gifting the US president with a 24-karat gold or gold-plated disc of some kind. As far as Apple goes, there's a name for this type of gift. Anyway, it's not 100% clear if the quote here, and this is the important part, means that specifically the chips that would be exempted need to be made in the US, or if just making literally anything in the US, manufacturing in the US, period, anything, would exempt tariffs of imported semiconductors as well. And so the plain English interpretation is more along the lines of making anything in the US would exempt the chips. That is how it is read in plain English. So that would mean that companies like Intel, GlobalFoundries, Micron, Texas Instruments, Samsung, and TSMC at least should be immune to these tariffs, considering they all either manufacture or plan to manufacture in the US. And that, again, by plain English, should apply to their products made outside of the US because they would be making literally anything here. Perhaps most notably, TSMC has pledged to invest $165 billion for fabs in places like Phoenix, Arizona. But we won't know exactly what the government intends until it rolls out the rules formally. Now, in our opinion on this, the smaller companies, the startups, the new chip designers, those are the ones that would theoretically be hurt the most because they are the ones with the least control over the supply chain and the situation. So up and coming competitors of the mega corporations that sort of dictate this industry, those are the ones that seem like they would be the most heavily impacted by this type of thing and would be the least capable of pursuing US manufacturing. But again, it's kind of unclear, well, but if they're using a supplier that makes anything in the US, then is all of their stuff exempt too? We really don't know. It's not clear right now. Up next, in the last bit of political landscape news intersecting tech this week, the next one is, it's important to this industry, the US president has stated that Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan should resign. In the last Hardware News episode, we reported on how Cadence had to cough up $140 million to the US government in fines. The company was accused of and pled guilty to conspiracy to commit export control violations to a Chinese military university that was believed to be, quote, simulating nuclear explosions, end quote. As we mentioned, Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan today was Cadence CEO Lip-Bu Tan at that time. Tan is now being questioned by U.S. officials over his ties to China in relation to the Cadence case. According to Reuters, on August 6th, U.S. Senator Tom Cotton sent a letter to Intel board chair Frank Yeary expressing, quote, concern about the security and integrity of Intel's operations and its potential impact on U.S. national security, end quote. Reuters reported that Yeary was asked, quote, whether the company's board was aware of the subpoena sent to Cadence during Tan's time there as CEO before Intel hired him, end quote. Cotton reportedly also asked what Intel was doing to address those concerns. Because the US government has been heavily investing in Intel, Cotton reportedly also asked if Intel, quote, required Tan to divest from chip firms in China linked to the Chinese military or Communist Party, and if Tan adequately disclosed other ties to Chinese companies, end quote. Cotton is also quoted as saying this, quote, Intel is required to be a responsible steward of American taxpayer dollars and to comply with applicable security regulations. Mr. Tan's associations raised questions about Intel's ability to fulfill these obligations, end quote. Reuters noted that an Intel spokesperson put out a response which read, quote, Intel and Mr. Tan are deeply committed to the national security of the United States and the integrity of our role in the U.S. defense ecosystem, end quote. I just need to jump in here for a second and just like, this is, again, this industry, it was not always this interesting to people outside of building computers for like basic work and games. Because I just like reading this and all I can think about is, I don't know, I mean, you really want the oxidized parts, or would you rather get the ones that are unstable for voltage problems in your computers? But I get it. They don't think about it for the same reasons. They have different concerns in mind. It is just, it's still weird for me. But this stuff is directly related to like how these companies operate and what they do in our industry as well. So we'll keep going. Reuters noted that an Intel spokesperson put out a response, which read, quote, back in April, Reuters reported that Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan invested, quote, at least $200 million in hundreds of Chinese advanced manufacturing and chip firms between March 2012 and December 2024, end quote. They also wrote, however, quote, it is not illegal for U.S. citizens to hold stakes in Chinese companies, even those with ties to Chinese military, end quote. The publication did, however, caveat that, quote, unless those companies have been added to the U.S. Treasury's Chinese military industrial complex companies list, which explicitly bans such investments, end quote. And now we get to the news for this part, which is on August 7th, President Trump weighed in on the matter and posted on Truth Social, quote, the CEO of Intel is highly conflicted and must resign immediately. There's no other solution to this problem, end quote. This is where I get to jump in with stuff where ignoring all of that, I don't care about any of that right now. It looks like Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, based on his actions, only ignoring all this political whatever, just looking at what he's done to Intel, it sure looks like Intel or its board of directors, I guess, went, we need someone to come up here and just get rid of everything possible. And that person will be vilified, and they will be hated, and they will be bad for morale, and they will really tear things apart internally, but they're going to save us a lot of money. That guy's going to be an axe man. We'll give him the hatchet, and then we'll say, wow, this went not the way we expected at all, and we'll send him out the door with a golden parachute, and then we'll bring someone else in to be a hero. That's kind of what it looks like. That is a very cynical look at things. But that is certainly how it's been done with big corporations in the past. So I don't know. That's my opinion on it. It looks kind of like they're setting this up where they bring in the guy to cut all the costs possible. They bring someone else in to try to start fixing it after. Anyway, Tan became CEO of Intel back on March 18th, replaced Pat Gelsinger. Gelsinger's last day was December 1st, 2024. And since then, the company's on track to let go of 25,000 employees and has had its stock drop roughly 17% from almost $24 down to just under $20 at the time of writing this. And that number will change by the time we publish and by the time you're watching it, but it's been a big drop. And then they've also talked about abandoning their high-end process nodes. But something else is missing from Intel, and it's just can't quite figure out what it is.
Papa's here.
That's what it was.
Thanks, Steve.
Look, comic relief at the end of a very tense series of stories. We've all made it through. Now we can celebrate by talking about computer hardware. Wait a minute. Next up, we reported on the news that Anandtech would be shutting down back in September. Future PLC, which purchased Anandtech's parent company Perch back in 2018 to the tune of $132.5 million, said it planned on keeping the site's content up as an archive. Less than a year later, a Redditor noticed that the site's content is not up as an archive. According to Anandtech's last editor-in-chief, Ryan Smith, Future originally said it was going to keep the site's content up, which chronicles 27 years of hardware. If only we could have seen the future coming. Let's see if the editors cut that joke off. Now, Anandtech.com takes visitors to the site's forums, which are still operational, but probably not worth investing much time in at this point based on what Future's doing. But who knows what the future holds. See what I did there? Up next, AMD quietly announcing the RX 9060. All right. Computer components. Good. Okay, it's gonna get easier now. Within its latest GPU driver update, AMD quietly unveiled its RX 9060 non-XT GPU. Compared to the XT model, which has 2048 stream processors, the 9060 has a reduced count at 1792. According to videocards.com, both the 9060 and the 9060 XT are based on the Navi 44 GPU. But the 9060, they say, won't be available in the DIY market. That means it'll be an OEM card for pre-built machines and system integrators. In terms of specs, the card will come with 8 GB of GDDR6 VRAM at 18 gigabits per second. This is slower than the 9060 XT, which the company advertises as being 20 gigabits per second. On the GPU's product page, AMD seemingly suggests it's a card meant for 1080p gaming, with the company posting nebulous 1080p benchmarks in a variety of games that include Assassin's Creed Mirage, Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and more. Now that was the news, but this is a rumor also about AMD. So serial hardware leaker Golden Mango has some more to say. AMD is allegedly poised to release 2 new Granite Ridge Zen 5 CPUs. The lower end of the models will supposedly be a 120-watt, 8-core, 16-thread CPU with 96 megabytes of L3 cache, and the higher end model will reportedly be a 200-watt, 16-core, 32-thread part with 192 megabytes of L3 cache. Highlighting the 192 megabyte L3 cache part, the leaker followed up with 3 monocle emojis. That's right, we all know what that means. What does that mean? The higher end model supposedly has the same number of cores and threads as AMD's 9950X3D, but has 64 megabytes more L3 cache and a 30-watt higher advertised TDP. This would indicate an AMD dual X3D, dual CCD component. So stacked cache on both CCDs if this rumor is true. And I think the biggest problem AMD is going to face with that is the name. I'm really worried about what they name it, to be honest. It's going to be like the 9950X squared 3D, X3 squared D, X6D, the 9950 2X3D, the 9950X3D2, the 9950X3DX2. It's just, they don't have a good track record with this kind of name. Up next, Dell revealed that millions of its laptops have critical vulnerabilities within the company's Control Vault 3 driver and firmware, which were derived from Broadcom components. The company stated that these vulnerabilities, quote, could be exploited by malicious users to compromise users' Dell laptops. Threat intelligence research organization Cisco Talos elaborated on these vulnerabilities and stated that bad actors could steal passwords and access sensitive data by exploiting the vulnerability. The company posted on its blog, quote, a non-administrative user can interact with the CV firmware using its associated APIs and trigger an arbitrary code execution on the CV firmware. From this vantage point, it becomes possible to leak key material essential to the security of the device, thus gaining the ability to permanently modify its firmware, end quote. The security flaw also lends itself to physical attacks, with Cisco Talos writing, quote, a local attacker with physical access to a user's laptop can pry it open and directly access the USH board over USB with a custom connector. From there, all the vulnerabilities described previously become in scope for the attacker without requiring the ability to log in to the system or knowing a full disk encryption password, end quote. The blog concluded that even fingerprint readers may not protect users from the security flaw. Quote, vulnerabilities in widely used firmware such as Dell Control Vault can have far-reaching implications, potentially compromising even advanced security features like biometric authentication, end quote. Dell says that it has an update that fixes this issue, and it told the Register that it started notifying customers about the fix on June 13th. If you have an affected device, you should install the update. And Dell told the publication, quote, working with our firmware provider, we addressed the issues quickly and transparently disclosed the reported vulnerabilities in accordance with our vulnerability response policy, end quote. Dell also told users to update their computers with the company's latest security updates. Now for the most important story this week, possibly this year, maybe, of all time. At least back to when Windows XP was released. That was more important because it's a prerequisite for this story. According to The Verge, Microsoft has created a set of limited edition Windows XP themed Crocs. That's right, we finally get something good out of Microsoft. The shoes are reportedly being sold internally first for $80 because, you know, Microsoft is hemorrhaging money and needs to nickel and dime its own employees. Aesthetically, the shoes feature Microsoft's old Bliss wallpaper as its backdrop, reminding us of a better time when you could click on a website and instantly get malware. It comes with little charms, or as Crocs calls them, is it pronounced gibbets? Look, I'm like almost as scared of Crocs fans as I am of anime fans. I hope it was correct. I'm sorry if it wasn't. I don't mean any offense. I think that's what they're called. So these include the original MSN logo, Internet Explorer desktop iconography, which that actually I kind of want, and Clippy. And what a time to do anything with Clippy. That is amazing. Louis Rossman is going to be so happy. I'm going to have to call him and tell him about that. Clippy has persisted. You might see him in the comments and user profile pictures everywhere, and now he'll even be on shoes. If the Crocs are anything like Windows 10, we assume they'll stop being supported in October of this year. All right, that's it for this hardware news. Thanks for sticking with us through it. It was like a heavy week with a lot of really big, important stories that have very wide-reaching geopolitical implications, and then a 9060 and maybe dual X3D on a dual CCD part. But we got through all that news. We got plenty more coming up. The 3-hour movie at the end of the week is, first of all, I've got a really long week ahead of me. I need to finish my parts of the edit. But secondly, it's going to be really cool when it goes up. We are excited for it. Check back for it and go to store.gamersnexus.net to support that effort directly. Patreon.com/gamersnexus. Let us know what you think about sort of how in-depth to go on the setup for the story, explaining why any of this exists versus just getting straight into the story, the cool parts, I guess, the travel parts. Post that below. It will help us a lot figure out what to do at the beginning. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. See you all next time.